Parental influences have devastating effects of their children in the long term and the short term. Our path to victory today will be to prove to you how the huge long-term negative impacts of parenting influences outweigh any possible benefits. To start with, I'm going to give you my first point, the effects on the children of these influences, and then my second point on the effects on their followers. My second speaker will talk about our split, why they are bad role models. To start off with, I'm going to do a little bit of characterization on what is a parenting influencer. Well, first of all, we know that the goal of any influencer is engagement, and this is usually because of a profit incentive. Parent influencers are the same, and they use their kids, often in things like family vlogging, where they vlog their entire lives, to get this engagement and get the money. What this means is that the kids get controlled by their parents to participate in these videos, and even if we accept that these parents could use this money for their kids, it's likely to be for taking them on a trip and filming the whole trip for the video. It's likely to be buying them a present and filming them receiving this present for the video. It's still used for this account, and therefore not a valid or true acceptance of this money for these children. So moving on to my first point, the effects of the children of influencers. First of all, we see that these children of influencers lose all of their privacy. The parents get to dictate what gets put on the internet and what doesn't, which means that the kids have often no control over what part of their lives is being shared in the public. This can deteriorate their relationship with their parents, and they become the reason these parents get the money. Now, this should be weighted very highly in this debate because the kids are the main stakeholders and have the most impact from this parenting influencing.
On that?
So primarily, parenting influencers are family vloggers because that's the content that gets them the most engagement. But we also see that to get this engagement, they have to be unique and different, which means that often it's not an actual true perception of what these lives are like, which can be sensationalized, it can be dramatized, which just overall means that this kid's life seems much more like a TV show, like a dramatized version. It means that if they have a mental breakdown, it's seen as a much bigger thing, and the parents post this online for everyone to see because it will get them this engagement. So what does this mean? Well, in the short term, this means that anyone that this child knows, once they get to school or anything, has this outlook into their lives, has this personal views that gets shared with everyone, especially in a school setting where often this will spread very quickly because of the way that things spread in schools. That now everyone in the school knows whenever this kid has crying over something, whenever this kid has relationship problems, whenever this kid has an issue or goes somewhere. This just creates obviously a horrible system of bullying and stuff, and it just means that this whole school now has this insight into this one person when they really shouldn't be this. So what are the outcomes of this? Well, first of all, we see that there's often large amounts of bullying over these issues, especially because of this dramatization. But we also see that people don't want to be friends with them because they don't want to be involved in this or shown as a reason this kid is having this meltdown, or they only want to be friends with them to become famous, to get on the internet and stuff, which just creates no real friendships for this kid. So moving on to my second mechanism about the relationship with their parents. So if your parents are also your boss, this obviously hugely strains your relationship. So in the most likely cases, your parents are forcing you to film these videos, often when you don't necessarily want to, because they whether you feel like it or not, they need to make this video, they need to get this engagement at any time, just so they can continue to get this money and stuff. So this often means they have to film you during an emotional struggle because that's what gets engagement. They often film you whether or not you want it. They often make you go places to film this content, even if you need to study, even if you need to want to hang out with your friends. They often just have this control over your lives because they need time to film this content. So we often see there are outcomes of this is we often see, first of all, there's often things like abuse. These parents are manipulating their kids. These parents could be abusing their children to make them come into these videos. But even if we take this at the best case, where these parents have this huge they're doing this for their children, they want to give them the money. Well, first of all, I mentioned before, the money often still goes towards the content filming, just to what the parent thinks is the children's benefit. But we also see that this means that their kids just still, at the very least, don't tell their parents about their struggles because they don't want it to be filmed and they don't want it to be published online. We see them trying to distance themselves from their parents so they don't have to be filmed. And even if we say, their parents have the best intentions, we still see it's going to have a huge strain on their relationship. So the impact of this is, first of all, they never escape the parent influencing content. This is going to follow them their whole lives, whether or not they, once they've left school, and stuff, it's still going to be over there. So not only does this mean like they have this speculation from outside people, it also is just deeply humiliating for them. And we see that often a lot of these child influencers have to go to counselling and stuff to like get past this sort of thing that's happened to them, and like these people who get to scrutinise and like dissect their entire childhood because of what their parents have posted. They can feel violated by their parents, and additionally the relationship strain with their parents means like maybe they want to leave their house as soon as they can so they don't have to get filmed. They don't want to go and visit their parents in case they want to film them all the time. Like there's just like a really struggle in this relationship with their parents. I'll take a POI now.
Don't you think this happens anyway on shows like Dance Mums and things like Disney Kids?
Well, we still see that in, like, we're not saying that we support things like Dance Moms on our side of the house, first of all, but also we see that there's a large difference between filming a small section of this kid's lives in a show like Dance Moms compared to, like, their whole upbringing through a parental influence perspective where the parent has complete control over what gets put out onto the internet. So moving on to the effect of the followers. First of all, people following these influencers are often seeking advice on parenting, but as I mentioned before, this is harmful because often the influencers aren't actually portraying a realistic view of what it's like to parent their child. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, we see that the majority of the views are coming from these parents to learn parenting tips, which is why they're often about these kids' lives. So this means that like it's going to be a dramatized version of these kids' lives that these parents are now thinking is like the right thing to do to parent their kids. So like also we see that like the end goal of these influencers is engagement, whether that's like positive or negative engagement, which means that they have like this like incentive to like not necessarily portray like positive parenting skills, because we actually often see that on the internet you get a larger amount of comments that are against you than for you, which just means that if you portray like a negative style of parenting, you're actually going to get more engagement because people prefer to like argue with someone on the internet than just like agree with them. So what do we see from this? Well, we see first of all this kind of normalizes bad parenting, and people who don't read all these negative comments will see it and think, oh, this like popular influencer is parenting their child in a negative way, like maybe I should be doing that to control my kids. This could be things like locking them in their rooms, it could be things like denying them food, which people just look at and think, wow, if this person is getting like many, like thousands and thousands of likes for doing this, maybe this is something I should be doing. But even if we decide that these parents are generally parenting their children in like a good way, we still see that like textbook parenting is not like good for every specific case of parenting. Each child is different. So what does this mean? This means that like parents are still taking in what these influencers are doing for their parents, even if it's like not like a necessarily bad parenting, and trying to use this for their kids when it's like a very different situation for their children. Which just creates like this whole world where like there's like one right way to parent their kids, and it's whatever these influencers are doing, even though that's not necessarily true in the real world. So the impact of this is, first of all, the sensationalized parenting becomes like outside of social media. On like the small scale, this means that these couple of families that follow these parenting influencers have like a misguided way of how to properly parent their kids, which like just disconnects these kids from their parents as well, and creates this horrible like family thing in their home, but also like because they just implicitly agree with people online, because we see this happening everywhere. But also at the large scale, this like normalizes this dramatized version of parenting style, or at least having like one parenting style be like the be all and end all of how you should be parenting your children, which just creates like a negative pathway for like the right way to parent your kids in the future. So basically at the end of this speech, what you should know is that first of all, the main stakeholders of this debate are the kids of these influencers, and this should be weighted very highly, because primarily we see that like this parenting influence isn't actually their decision, because often it starts at a young age where they can't properly consent to being posted online. And we also see that like these parents have this massive control over them, which just makes that any possible monetary benefit that could be gained from this influencing, whether or not this even goes back into the children, which as I mentioned before, it likely wouldn't, or if so, at the cost of it being for the platform. Still, at the worst case, it's hugely outweighed by these kids being abused and like manipulated by their parents. And even if the parents have the best intention, it still creates a strained relationship and a violation of privacy. Thank you.
Give the speaker to their speech and invite up first Ned.
Look, in a world where every kid is different and these new parents are struggling, we think that the only way to fix this is through parent influences. 5 things in this debate. 1, some setup. 2, some rebuttal. 3, why parenting influences are so helpful for new parents. 4, why children actually get exploited more on the comparative. 5, Nathan has an extension on these exploitations. Okay, we think that parenting influencers are actually any social media plus podcaster influence who post content about parenting. No, we don't actually think these kids need to be in their the video, and we think this interacts nicely with the material about like abusing these kids and stuff, but more on that later. We think there are like examples of this, like, oh, how I deal with my neurodivergent child, or come spend a day with me at Disneyland. Note, it's not just a parent who like posts photos on their child on social media. We think just most parents do that in general. Look, we want to be clear in our world that parenting influences still exist, but we think that there's more scrutiny and that the weeding out of bad parents is actually growing. We take this idea of Piper Rockley, who had a documentary about her being such a bad person, and it gained so much influence. Look, we win this debate by proving parenting influences actually bring really good benefits to the table. Look, some quick rebuttal. They told us that these like children are exploited and like they're going to be like really abused and stuff like that. What we tell you is the really extreme minority of children. We think most parents just want to be good and probably aren't abusing them to this degree. Even if they are abusing them to this degree, we gave you this POI about them just shoving them onto like dance moms and stuff like that. And what was their response? Their line of analysis was, oh, dance moms like is just a little snippet of their life. No, we tell you that when these parents go on dance moms and put their children in it, dance moms consumes their whole life, and that becomes their whole entire personality, actually making it so much worse. They also told us that every single child is different and social media isn't going to cater to this. Well, I'm actually going to flip this and tell you how are you going to learn about every single nuance in a book which is based on the stereotypical child made to be sold to so many different people. I'll tell you how. You simply can't. Look, we accept that things are online, and we tell you that you get a little more nuance from this. All right, one, why influencers are helpful. Look, the status quo has really, really important information. People are learning how to be a parent, and they need to deal with certain things. People consume media differently in this age. We're not buying books, and we're not going to Mummy and Me classes. The way we understand and apply ideas to neurodivergent kids has changed so much in the last 10 years. 4 mechanisms here for you today. 1, parenting books and classes. Look, they're outdated and they often, these books are outdated and they often talk about the perfect stereotypical child. It's a methodic way to write a book because these sellers want to appeal to the most amount of people as possible. These Mummy and Me classes are not only less popular, but they're also quite expensive, and we just don't think that people can reasonably afford them in today's society. Look, they study the stereotypical child and they leave parents confused. Now, why is this bad? When they apply these experiences and they don't apply to the neurodivergent child, what does the parent think? Either A, I've done something wrong, I've messed up, it's me who's the problem, or why isn't my child conforming? There is something wrong with them. Both extremely harmful things. Alright, 2, nuanced content. A lot of the content shared about neurodivergent kids is really, really good. Why is this? It's really useful because, as I told you before, each kid is different and has different nuances. It's a non-exploitative thing. We don't think these parents are trying to be like, oh, there's my autistic kid, getting more veggies. I think it's more like I've had to struggle through this. I don't want you to struggle through this. Let me show you what helped for me, and I can apply that, and you can apply that. We see this in podcasts such as Tilt Parenting, where an autistic kid's mother talks about her experiences, what she suffered through, and shares with others, and then talks with experts working through issues to help reach a goal. We think that this is not accessible to regular parents who are already struggling to raise a kid, and they just simply don't have time to make a book or make a class. Look, without social media on their side, the barrier of entry increases so much, and you get so much less views. Look, we fail to see how AF can cater to more kids and at a more nuanced level. Look, different avenues. I told you these parents can't afford classes. I told you these books simply don't work. So what would you do? Logically, my parents parented me. I'm going to go to them. Here's why that's bad. You're going to get outdated views from parents who probably don't understand the modern era, when discourse, mental health, and anxiety simply didn't exist, and the simple solution was literally suck it up. They're going to give bad advice or tell you back in my day, this simply wasn't a problem. Okay, look, the example here is my kid is always on devices. What do? Logically, you try to address the root of the problem. Maybe this is anxiety. What's your parent going to do? Simply throw the device away. It's unhelpful advice, and it's simply not addressing the core root. Look, so a split on hopefulness here. Look, we see influencers and hopeful, and you see how they struggled, and you know it's possible to get through. You know there's light at the end of the tunnel if you're truly struggling. Note all this material interacts with their textbook methods and how they gain more diverse views on their side. Look, what do we get here? We get less barrier barriers of entry and a large variety of content which is A, more relevant, B, more diverse, and C, more nuanced. Look, note, parents are a non-homogeneous group, which means there are lots and lots of variety and you simply can't write a book. Look, why is this important? Because so many parents are struggling, whether they're new or not, on how to deal with their child because every child is different. The barriers of entry leading to this rise exponentially, making it really difficult to access information on their side. Why is it so important they have access? Because now they have access, they can feel accomplished when they use these ideas and their work, and they see their kids getting a good night's sleep finally. This empowers parents to do the best they can. Look, why children get exploited more. Children exploitation always existed. We see this in like reality TV shows, but we see this in the sports sphere and the beauty pageant sphere. We all know about this. No, parenting influences aren't an outcome and didn't create bad parenting, but it's simply another avenue for these bad parents to exist. 3 mix here. Look, without social media, bad parents exist anyway. If they didn't exist on social media, they're probably willing to exploit them on some sort of level to get fame. No, we agree with this on both sides, but this is actually the minority of parents. 2, why parents want fame. They want fame because clearly they probably messed something up as a child. It's like, oh, I didn't win a gold in a swimming competition, so you're going to win a gold, right? This looks like parents on Dance Mom when they allow their children to be screamed at by Abby Lee Miller and put them on a hierarchical pyramid lead, and then the parents are actually endorsing them. What a ludicrous thing to do. Look, this looks like Disney kids when their parents are putting them in positions on Hollywood in order to be exploited so they can actually gain more money. This looks like parents living through kids vicariously on the sports field and through beauty pageants because they couldn't do it when they were kids. Look, why is it worse? Because social media people can point parents out, and social media can allow parents to compare and contrast what each other are doing. Note this material interacts with their material on how kids actually get worse outcomes, and they told us that the child is the main stakeholder. So even if we only win on this point, we win the whole entire debate. Look, also they have this idea of parents being your bosses, but we actually think it's worse on their side, because when you don't have your parent as a boss and you have some random person who's I don't know, a director who's makes you read lines every single hour of every day to get perfect, and then you've got that added pressure of your parent telling you to be perfect. We just think that's so bad. What do we get here? We get parents who are exploited worse without social media, and we told you that bad parents existed. We told you they're going to be put on TV shows, or their lives are going to be consumed by sports. What if their self-worth is simply determined by what placing they get in a sports game? I tell you what happens, it's simply awful and their self-esteem goes down. This matters most because kids are always going to be exploited, and in our world we get less exploitation. What have I proven in this speech? 1, parenting influences help kids get a more diverse and nuanced understanding. Children get exploited more without social media, and on the comparative, they simply don't have any way to help the struggling parents at all. Thank you.
Thank the speaker for this speech and invite out the second affirmative speaker.
Look, I find it interesting that the negating side of the house wants to use dance moms to their advantage of an example of why, parenting influencing on our side, not having it as bad, right? When the show is literally called Dance Moms, it's about the parents, influencing their children to go into dance and allowing them to get exploited by this show, right? This is a parenting choice, right? And I think it's interesting that they want to use this. Now, in my speech today, I'm going to do some rebuttal on what the first speaker has said. Some rebuttal on their points about, why influences are helpful, which is going to be a big point of clash today, so I want you to focus on this. And I also am going to do some rebuttal on other things they've brought up. And then I'm going to be doing my split on why parenting influencers are bad role models and how this is going to have negative flow-on effects on desperate parents, which we both agree are really important in today's debate. Now, first, some rebuttal. They bring up some counter on what parenting influencing looks like, right? So Thora has already told you a little bit on what parenting influencing looks like. It basically just looks like content that is catered or involves parents and their families and their lives, right? And we agree with what the negating side has brought up about the content also looking like different forms, like podcasts, trying to give advice, right? We're willing to claim this, right, because it's actually going to benefit this, and I'm going to prove it to you using their examples.
On that.
First of all, they bring up the topic of parents using their platforms to bring awareness to children who have maybe certain struggles in life, neurodivergent children, and helping parents, right? But we already told you through Thor, and I'm going to be reaffirming this throughout my speech, that basically these parents don't innately have the best knowledge to provide for other parents, right? They have their own unique circumstances. It's weird that they kind of claim that because one parent gives advice on how to deal with a neurodivergent child, all of a sudden every parent in the world is going to be able to deal with their neurodivergent child because every child has the same circumstances, right? This is just completely not true, right? Every parent has different circumstances, different socioeconomic circumstances, different amounts of children, different kinds of children, right? So we just don't see how parenting influencing can really be a strong benefit on their side because every child is different, right? Every struggle is different. And particularly with their example of bringing up parents using examples of helping out your children for specific struggles, we don't really see this as being very strongly applicable to parents, and I'll be going more onto this in my split of why it's harmful. Okay, again, they tell us that they're going to get less exploitation on their side, which is a really big push, and I think this is also going to be a very big clash in today's debate, so listen to what I'm about to say. They're saying that they're going to get this more without they say they're going to get less exploitation, right, with social media, which I just want to rebut this straight out the way. Social media is such an exploitative platform, right? We tell you that the profit incentives, which is really important in today's debate, so I'm going to reaffirm this, right? Profit incentives of these parental influences, right? We see that parental influences, they are trying to get engagement so they can get money, and they do this through sensationalizing the content that they push out, right? We see this with dance moms. They're literally trying to get engagement. They're literally trying to get money, right? And so they are literally sensationalizing the media, right? We have this on both sides, okay? Dance moms exist on both sides, but on their side, they have a bigger push for parental influences, which we tell you inherently, they are trying to live off of this money. They are trying to live off of this. So therefore they are going to get more engagement through sensationalizing the media. Why is this bad? It's because it's inherently exploiting their children, right? We see this as the money that they do make and is inherently going to go back into trying to make more sensationalized media. We see this with YouTube families, right? Family bloggers. We see this with the LeBron families, with Norris Nuts, all these families who take their kids out on really big trips, and it's not even benefiting the kids, right? Because they're filming them, because they're literally putting this money into exploiting their children even more, even when they should just be living their lives with their children. I'll take a POI now.
If children are going to Disneyland, how are children just not having fun at Disneyland because they're going there?
Okay, well, first of all, we tell you about the profit incentives, right? These parents are only doing this basically because they are creating content out of it, right? This is inherently bad because one, these children are just constantly being reminded of the fact that everything they do in life that is fun is because their parents are exploiting them, because their parents are creating this content around their lives, and that's basically the only reason that why they are doing it in the first place, right? So even if the kids get a little trip to Disneyland, it's not permanently enshrined on the internet, right? And they're constantly reminded that the only reason they did this in the first place was to get money out of that. And that is bad for what Thora said about children having long-term negative impacts and views on their lives, right? Now, furthermore, just a little bit on the exploitation model, we tell you that social media is inherently really harmful, right, because of the profit incentives, right? But just to further push on this, parenting influencers posting their children on the internet, right, which is a really popular form of parenting influencing. It's just inherently harmful because these children are enshrined on the internet forever. Their lives are permanently enshrined forever on the internet, right? No matter what they wanted posted, no matter what they have posted, right? All this sensationalized aspects of their lives are permanently enshrined, and this is really, really bad because it makes them feel bullied, right? People are going to always know about them. They become public figures. They no longer have privacy, right? Not in their own lives, not on the internet, right? This has long-term impacts because everything on the internet lasts forever, right? So they just become these permanent public figures, Piper Rockell that they brought up, the kids from Dance Moms, right? They are now forever figures who are going to be defined by that, and that is really bad. Okay, now onto my split about why parenting influences are inherently bad role models. First of all, this is mainly going to touch on what parenting influences push, right? And I'm going to give you some examples for this. So first of all, these parents lead misinformation about their lives, right? The stuff that they present on in their content, right, is inherently usually just hides the truthful information, or it just isn't really truthful or reflective of their actual lives, right? This is because they're influencers, and I'll give you some examples. First of all, this looks like people like Nara Smith, the ballerina farm family, right? These are traditional wives, right? Their content is catered towards their family. It's catered towards raising their children, okay? So why is this an example of misinformation? Because they're not truthful about the fact that their entire lives that they are posting on the internet is defined by the fact that they make money out of this content, right? Why is this really, really bad? Because their incomes are defined by the fact that they have the circumstances to be able to post their families, to be able to support them, right? This is highly idealized versions of the traditional wife life, right? So why is it harmful? First of all, because we both agree that these parents are seeking out advice from parenting content, right? We agree that these are desperate parents who are trying to seek out help, right? If you have a desperate parent who is looking at Nara Smith's content and thinking, wow, if I just start cooking food and letting my husband pay for everything, my life is going to be so wonderful because we're going to be able to survive, right? This is kind of not true, because not only do we just know that they are very rich families, right? Even before they became able to supplement their incomes, right? Nara Smith, she was a very famous model. Her husband was a very famous model. They came from a very, very rich family, and they were able to live this life inherently because of the money they already had and because of the money they were able to rake in. So this is really bad for desperate parents, and you should weigh this highly, because we both agree that this is an important stakeholder in today's debate. Because these parents, these families, are not able to actually implement the advice that these influencers are giving, right? They're telling you that you should live these lives. They're telling you that you should live these lives and take these certain lifestyle choices to benefit your families, because look at how great it is. But what we know the actual reality is that these desperate parents, these socioeconomic conditions they live in, the amount of children, they're not able to actually sustain them because their lives are not symmetrical to what they see on the internet. And this is really important, right? Because we tell you that because of this, they're going to have negative effects by trying to implement that information, but also they're just going to have negative impacts because the information they are getting is not actually beneficial to their lives. Thank you.
Thank the speaker for their speech, and welcome up the second negating speaker.
I'm going to split the speech up into three sections. Firstly, on the parents and their incentives and why they're making content. Secondly, on the children themselves, exploitation, and I'm going to extend on Oliver's material on exploitation and why that's so much worse. And I'm also going to lastly talk about helping parents and why that is uniquely beneficial and exclusive to our side of the house and not theirs. But firstly, I want to note at the top of this speech that we literally heard no counterfactual from them and what exactly their world was going to look like, and that we don't know how they're going to help parents. We don't know how they're going to get parents to get content. I think that is extremely harmful because that puts them uniquely behind in this debate. So firstly then, on the idea of parents and their incentives, what have they told us? They characterize parent influence as these greedy people that just want money, views, and engagement. I want to challenge into this characterization, right? Firstly, because we think that like the majority of people who actually post content are ones that just want to share knowledge about what their like daily lives of their family is, or like their parenting tips, because I think it could be uniquely helpful given their circumstances online. But additionally, they told us this profit incentive. I want to note here that like trying to make money off of social media is like uniquely really hard, right? This is because like you need like millions of views just to get like a couple $100. Like you cannot sustain yourself off of that. Like you can't fund a giant trip to Disneyland off of your like 2 million followers realistically, right? I think that means like a lot of their material here. But what did they tell us? They told us that the majority of parents are just like exploiting their children for content and stuff. I want to know that this is probably the minority of parent influencers, right? The only reason you hear so many stories about this is because it gets picked up and sensationalized by the media. You hear like a few stories of like parents exploiting their children, and that suddenly becomes the image of parent influencers. We want to note that like a lot of parent influencers are actually very helpful, and they actually do help people. We think that that is uniquely beneficial to people. Now that I've clarified, like, but also, what else did they tell us about parent influencers? They told us that like, they're going to sensationalize the content of their child's lives, and that's going to be really badly. They gave us the example of like filming your child having a mental breakdown. Firstly, I just think that's unrealistic for a parent to want to post that, right? Because it's probably a very bad look on you, and like, you know, like it's probably not a good look. If you see a parent post like, this is my child having a mental breakdown, everyone's going to be like, what, like, why are you posting this? But also just like, what the hell, you're probably a very bad parent. But also, secondly, we don't think parents have this inherent incentive to be exploitative and mean to their children, right? They are their parent, right? You have to care for your child. That's literally why so many people have children, because they want to love them, they want to care them. We think the majority of people do love their children, only a small minority actually just do exploit them. We think that they don't contend with the majority of parents that are actually caring for their children, posting beneficial content. But let's talk about the children then, and their exploitation. Okay, so what did they tell us here? They told us that children are being exploited. I'm gonna like whip Oliver's material here on like how he gave his second point about how children are uniquely more like exploited and like abused under their side of the house without social media. Why is this? Oliver already told you a lot of material, such as things such as beauty pageant, sports and stuff, that parents put their children into pressure. But why is this uniquely even worse for their children, right? We think that like the idea of like pulling out your phone and taking a video of your child like unwrapping the Christmas gifts, that's probably not that bad compared to literally like pushing your child through like a very rigorous like beauty pageant like regime, like making your child like starve themselves so they're nice and slim for the beauty pageant, making them like dye their hair blonde. We think that that is uniquely harmful. We don't think people are doing that for social media because they're just portraying their normal lives, but also we think that on an extreme level it like literally leads to even worse outcomes for them in the long term. Take like Jeanette McCurdy, for example, who got put on like Sam and Cat. Her mother literally forced her to go into Hollywood. She gave her, like Jeanette McCurdy, like an eating disorder. We think that is uniquely harmful. We don't understand why we don't get any of that, but why do we think that that is more likely to happen without parent influences? Firstly, we think that these parents inherently want to be like famous in some way, and they do this through their children. Without social media influencing occurring on their side, they find these different avenues and ways to actually do this. That's extremely harmful, and we think that's exclusive to their side. We think we would rather have children just like being filmed unwrapping their Christmas gifts or like eating breakfast, rather than being pushed through like rigorous training schedules, like being forced to train like 5 times a week so they make like the premier like soccer team. We think that that is extremely harmful for these children.
PY.
Okay, but now I'm going to give you my extension on why we can actually catch exploitation using social media and TikTok. Okay, firstly, we think that viewers on TikTok or YouTube probably can pick up on signs that that this child is being abused. Like if you're watching a video and you see the child like being really quiet, being really shy, being scared to be on the camera, you're probably going to pick up on that, right? We're going to be like, what's going on? That's kind of weird. Secondly, this probably leads to like discourse within the community, like either in the comment section or like on Reddit or something, where people are like, I'm actually really concerned about their kid. But why are they concerned about kids? Because humans are just like inherently caring creatures, and especially for children, because they're like so small and they're so cute, right? And like you want to care for them because like you just don't want to see children being like upset. Like when you see a child crying in the street, you're probably feeling very empathetic towards them. If you see them being like exploited behind the screen, you're also going to feel empathetic. Thirdly, this leads to like action, right? We think that it's either like, I don't know, canceling that influencer, but also like, you know, calling child protective services and like being like, hey, this is probably a problem you want to look into. But like outcomes, what do we prove at this end of this point? We think we can uniquely catch child exploitation, but why is that unique to our side? Because parents are using their children for social media to catch this exploitation. We think that that means you can expose more parents that exploit their children. They would have inherently done it anyway, but they only have social media now.
PY.
Okay, but why is this so important for the child? We think like we care for the child, right? We want to care for them. If you have like millions millions of people beginning to pick up on the fact that the child is being exploited. We think that is extremely harmful because like we want to help them so much. Okay, I'll take a POI now.
Yeah, so if like famous children are often being like abused behind the scenes, then why would you have less exploitation if you're having like more famous children who are like being sensationalized in the media as a result of parental influencing?
I just think that like it gets even worse under their side of the house because you don't have social media as a protection mechanism to actually get that exploitation shown to the public. If you're like being abused in a beauty pageant, no one's gonna see that. At least you can see that on social media. Okay, so then let's talk about helping parents and like all of Oliver's material on helping parents as well. Note that we heard literally no responses from Second about how like we actually help parents that struggle with their like neurodivergent children. We think that is uniquely beneficial and exclusive to our side. But I want to add some mechanisms here because it's not just about like neurodivergent children. It can be about like how to get your kid to eat broccoli, how to get like potty train your child. We think that that is extremely beneficial because parents like literally want to do this. But why is social media so helpful? Because social media is so accessible, right? Like you can literally download it with a click of your phone. You don't have to go out to buy like a textbook and read the giant like parenting textbook. But you also don't have to sign up for big like Mummy and Me classes that cost you hundreds of dollars. We think that that is extremely beneficial. But also like I also want to know like you can just get like this validation of being a parent from online, right? But also you see like this like I want to respond to their material about how like it's just not realistic online, right? They said that like you're only going to see one type of content and you're going to realize like you're going to have to live your life like Nara Smith. I think that's just unrealistic because inherently social media has so much content on it. You're going to see lots of different videos. Like I see lots of videos that's like come make dinner with me as like a low income family of 5. We think those videos are actually what's really, really helpful for these struggling parents. They're probably likely to see that, not Nara Smith like making of like the perfect boyfriend from scratch. You know, that's probably what the videos they're going to see. I think that that is uniquely helpful for these parents because they're literally struggling, right? Like new parents are parenthood is scary. People are struggling to be parents. It's scary to raise like a literal human being. By going onto social media and having this added support, by seeing the hundreds of thousands of videos that actually provide you good parenting advice, we think that that is extremely helpful for parents. Note that they gave you no like specific alternative as to how you can get access to this wealth of information. We don't think parent influences forces parents to live their lives like Nara Smith. We think it actually helps them to raise their children better.
Thanks the speaker for this speech and invite up third affirmative.
Alright, throughout this debate we get sort of two main points of clash. We have the exploitation of children and the effects, whether they be positive or negative, on the viewers of this content, right? I'm going to start with the exploitation of children and I'm going to flag some material here. We hear this sort of really big push about how things like Dance Mums and like Disney Kids are things that like we get on our side as well, and how this is still really bad for children. Yes, we agree. Of course we don't want children to be like exploited in kind of like any sort of form, right? But what we do hear from them as well, that social media like lowers the barrier to entry. More people can get on it, right? We completely agree. We think this is like an incredibly bad thing. As we have told you, right, well mechanized through like our first and second speakers, is that family vloggers are like incentivized to sort of make sensational media for profit, right? They talk about how, you know, there's this profit incentive, there's all these reasons why people would want to go, and they would want to sort of make material which is going to like engage people, right? We hear some sort of like rebuttal from the Negating team about like how we will see like parents like exploiting children here and they'll be cancelled, right? Whether this be true or not, they are like in a way conceding here that these children get exploited in the first place, right? This is just incredibly bad. We don't think that like this is a good thing. They also try to sort of minimize the impact that we get from kind of like these vloggers, saying that like most people don't want to exploit their kids on social media, right? And like the vast majority are just making helpful videos. They can't really like collate this fact with the idea that like the majority and the most popular like sort of family influencer videos are like by family vloggers. They're by people that have like 20 kids, and they're like going on and like doing all these things with them. And this is having sort of really negative effects on the children. As we tell you, they go on, they like have like worse lives, right? They end up in situations where they don't trust like the system. They feel that they're being like scrutinized at every moment. There's like all these negative impacts we get from this, right? Even if, we say that not every social media influencer is doing this, we're saying that enough of them are doing it, and it's like the most popular ones, that there are going to be like really negative impacts on like a lot of these children, right? This is like a very big harm. Like both teams flag this. We all want children to be better off, right? We think that like the real like systemic harm for like 18 years of a child's life, where they're just being like used for content, right, is going to result in really bad impacts, right, for like quite a large amount of children, right? We also kind of get like this pushback from like the Negating team about, that most families like don't make this much money. You can't live on like an influencer budget, right? We believe that like in a lot of cases, like this is true, right? We were going like with the best case like argument where, the influencers do make lots of money, and somehow this is like being put back into the kids, right? And that this, could like still in some way be, considered like a benefit, but we have like proven why this isn't true. But we do say that like in the majority of cases, the people that can't live on this, they just put their children in like worse situations, right? We see like these family vloggers of like 6 people living in like this tiny camper van, right? In like conditions which are just like incredibly like inhumane to like have to raise a child in. For these reasons, we can see that like the exploitation of children is, in many ways symmetrical, right? We hear that like, the dance mums and stuff is like incredibly bad on our side, but we don't really get any pushback on like why you can't have that on their side of the house, right? Like in the status quo, where we do have these like family influences, we still have like plenty of these TV shows, we still have plenty of these like other avenues of media where these children are being exploited, right? And we think that, their entire point about like social media, like lowering the barrier to entry is really just a really good thing for our team, right? Of course, it just means that like parents don't have to like go and like put them into like insane like sports things, right? Or like, make them go into like becoming like the #1 soccer player in the world by like abusing them. Obviously that's like really bad, but we think that that's like way harder to do than just put them on social media, like which, as we have explained, puts you in a sort of very uniquely sort of easy position to like exploit a child for money, right?
On that.
Secondly, okay, I'll take your point away.
Why is watching a video about making dinner for my low-income family bad for low-income parents?
We don't think that's a bad thing at all, but what we have told you is that like the majority of videos, right, and like the most like watched videos, like the most sensationalized things are things where these children are being exploited, right? That means that like we think that enough children are being exploited under this system that it does like outweigh any benefits you can get from it, right? Furthermore, we do see that there are like plenty of other avenues, like even on social media, it doesn't have to be like family vloggers making, like plenty of people can just make cooking videos, right? That has nothing to do with like family vloggers inherently, right? That's still there. Secondly, we have this idea on the effects of viewers, right? We have this big pushback from like the Negating team about like how like influencers can be like really positive like impacts on people, right? In like the worst cases, we tell you, these influencers are often like pushing an agenda. We see like with the trad wife movement, like as we tell you, these people like obviously are like in a position where they're trying to influence people to like live their life in a certain way. The ways that they're like influencing to you live your life are not like inherently necessarily a good thing, right? They're telling you, oh, like women should like give up their right to vote. Like these children should like not learn to read or write if they're like female because like that's not their place, right? Like obviously these kind of things we see as having like really harmful like impacts on the children, right? This was brought up by my second speaker. So like all in all, this doesn't really help the Negating team, right? This is just more material on like why there's going to be like a wider impact on like sort of negative effects on like the viewers of these things as well. Furthermore, they kind of tell us like this, they had this big push on like mummy and me classes and like how this is like relatively unaffordable for a lot of people, right? And influencers does like provide an avenue, right? We think that like there's no reason why parents who are like nervous about raising their child won't be like just discussing this like within like their close circles anyway, right? And we do prefer that like people will be like surrounding themselves by like close and trusted people, and these are the people that like they discuss it with, right? We think that these people are just like generally going to be like more informed to sort of give information on like how you should raise your child, because like at the end of the day we hear no reasons from the negating team. Like there is nothing about like why an influencer is sort of particularly like well suited to like teach you how to raise your child, right? They have this like sort of small push about like people who have raised say like a special education child or like someone with disabilities, and like how they kind of like have this like experience in the past, right? But we don't think that this is like a very major issue, and we think that like there are still plenty of people like out in the public, people that you see like kind of, you know, within your circles, like within like school groups and who can like also provide you with this information in what is going to be like a way less kind of like sensationalized way, right? Because obviously, as we have told you, these influencers are like specifically in a position where they do kind of want to make money off it, right? Which for whatever reason, that means that like there are just kind of going to be like more like underlying negatives for the people. So what we get at the end here is we get like this kind of pretty like symmetrical sort of push here. Like we tell you that there's going to be people can like discuss this with their close friends. Like people will be able to sort of go out in society and still get plenty of information on like how to parent their kids, right? We prefer that they get it from like close trusted circles, from people we know, because we think these people are like way less likely to kind of like sort of have sort of negative agendas for like their kids, right? These are people you trust. These are people like who you know what they're trying to get out. As we've told you, like social media, it's like you know, conceded. People have like underlying motivations and like they don't show the entire picture, right? This means that you actually really don't get a very good image out of it. So what we see at the end is like we're not actually really losing any kind of amount of like parenting knowledge, right? But what we do show you is that like more children will be abused on their side of the house, right? Social media does lower the barrier for entry. It means that more people will have like more ease to like put their kids in situations where they can try profit off it, right? They can like push their agendas, which is going to like cause people to sort of have like misinformed opinions about how to raise their child. This is going to like result in sort of like worse results for children overall, and we're going to get a world where like more children are damaged under like the family influencer model. Thank you.
Thank the speaker and welcome up third Meg.
We think that app has lost today's debate when they assume that bad parents are created by an opportunity to be an influencer rather than them already existing and being like bad parents through other avenues already. Now, I think this debate is like about a very homogenous group, and I think there's like quite there's quite like spectrum of how different parents can act, but I'm going to try and broadly characterize them into two groups. Firstly, quite intense and maybe exploitative parents. We think this is the minority of parents. We don't think there's that many parents, and the other group is like good parents that they actually really want to help. Why is this? Because they've given birth to their children. Most parents really care about their children. We think we're willing to accept there are going to be really awful exploitative parents. We think it's going to be such a minority in this debate, and we think a lot of these good parents, how they're going to act is they're going to tend to try and keep their kids out of content when they can, really try and have their kids' best intentions in mind, maybe blur their face. If they're going to have them in a video, it's going to be when they're older, 13 or 14, and they're going to go through the proper things. We think these intense exploitative parents always exist. We think this looks in the parent influencer world, like Piper Raquel, but we also think in the non-parent influencer world, Britney Spears. We think they haven't given us any reasoning on why that they're going to be able to prove that they're going to see more in the parent influencer world. The only thing they came out at third was there's going to be a less barrier to entry into parent influencers, which means now more parents are going to exploit their kids online. We don't think it's really easy now to go on social media and post about your kids. Parents are now going to just want to exploit them. So they haven't given us any reason why they get more exploitative parents on their side of the house. Finally, additionally, we think the reason this exploitative parents is such a low majority is they've kind of run it on the characterization that they believe these parents run on like a business model and they care only about profit. We don't think like parents are like businesses. We think like they care about their kids and they care about their kids a lot more than money. Like it's just such an unrealistic characterization that they're just gonna it's just thing. I'm going to reference this throughout my speech. Now, who is impacted, who impacts the followers better? Now they gave us they're going to be incentivized to rage bait their followers and give really bad parenting advice to get more views. This is such a small portion, such a mischaracterization, and we also think that people are just going to see I'm going to lock my kids in a cupboard, and people are going to be like, oh, that's what I should do as a parent. It was just a really unrealistic characterization that kind of got dropped as well. Secondly, they gave us a split on trad wives and misinformation and Nara Smith being the perfect parent. Firstly, we think a lot of this content maybe isn't for parents to assume. It's just Nara Smith posting about her life. It's maybe not parentally designed conflict. Secondly, we think a lot of these people aren't going to relate. If you're just in such an opposite situation to Nara Smith, you're on a lower wage and you really struggle to make a meal for your kids. You're not going to go and look at her content. You're just not relating to it. If you're also struggling with neurodivergence, you're not going to go to her. You're probably going to look to avenues where you can really relate to, and that's where you're going to get your advice from. And secondly, we think it's going to be way worse on their counterfactual, which they have failed to engage in, because we think only these parents can actually go and post parenting advice, because we think the barrier to entry to writing a book or having a class is really expensive and high. So we think only the rich parents are going to be able to get in and be able to produce a book, because they're it costs a lot of money to spend the time and time off to be able to write a book. Now, talking about this counterfactual, they came out at second and really strawmanned our case by saying we're just going to have a better side, and they're actually going to be really good, and they didn't really engage in a comparative about the books and the classes, what their side actually looks like. Now I'll re-explain why we get better influence. Firstly, we have a higher barrier to entry with these books and classes, like I already said. It's expensive to get into them. Secondly, a lot of these influencers just don't have the time. If you're really struggling to raise a neurodivergent kid and you've had to leave your job to do that, you don't have the time as well to go and write a book and go to the classes. So we think a lot of the people who are going to have the nuanced takes aren't going to have that access. And thirdly, we think all these books in the status quo are really outdated and doesn't look at modern parenting. It's so bad that they haven't engaged in this comparative, because there's nothing we can compare our case to. Now let's talk about the comparative that they did suggest. They said you go and talk to your inner circles. Why is this so bad as a counterfactual for them? Because we think all children are different, and we think you're going to go talk to your inner circles when you're really struggling. Your kid doesn't get out of bed to go to school in the morning, so you go and talk to your inner circles to your parents. But their kids don't struggle with neurodivergence. Their kids don't struggle to get out of bed in the morning. So they go, look, all you've got to do is what I did, which worked on my kid. It's not going to work on your kid. It's so harmful, because then you get isolated from your community. You have schools saying you're lazy, you can't get your kid out of bed in the morning. This is so harmful as a counterfactual on their side of the house. Why is this so beneficial for us in this case? Well, we think that parents, we think there's so much impact in this case. We think that these influences impact so many parents, so many struggles. The impact is so wide, rather than this really narrow, small group of exploitative parents. Now, moving on to the second point of clash, who's going to impact the children? They gave us this really weird material on losing privacy, and then dropped it, so I'm going to quickly respond to it. Firstly, we think this is sacrifice anyway when kids, parents post on Facebook anyway. We think also the crazy parents on the TV shows are still going to lose the privacy, Piper Raquel and Dance Moms. We also think you're always going to have the awful parents, and we think if you're really going to exploit your parents and be really rude about their privacy, you're going to be hated in your community. We've given you lots of material. Secondly, this stuff about parents and your boss, we think it's going to be the same again. A lot of this material is similar, and we also think it's much worse on our side, because you have two bosses now. You have the TV show boss and the other boss. What is this engaging in their material? Well, they've really misunderstood what we mean by Dance Moms and Disney Kids. What we're saying is there's a set number of really exploited parents. They're always going to exist. Whether they go to parent influence or whether they go to Dance Moms, it's always going to be the same. Now, why is it much worse for this? Well, it's because of Nathan's split. Nathan told you that it's much more pressuring in the TV show environment. maybe the parents are like crazy and exploitative, but they're gonna have like some
You know
level of
what?
remorse, and they just want to post on like their family blog and maybe get you to cry a bit. We think on the comparative, it looks like Disney kids being like abused, being like getting like eating disorders developed because they're like so pressured. We think they like have no respect for their rights on TV. We think they're like actively pressuring them like to have these meltdowns rather than just happening on their own and posting them. We think like it's much, much worse on our side of the house. Finally, also in Nathan's split, he told you that it's much easier to catch these parents. We think firstly, because like Disney's a hard corporation to go out of. We know these Disney parents, these Disney abuses these kids, but we can't actually get at them. Secondly, it's like much more obvious, and like the community will like know these parents posting on like the family accounts, so it's much easier. So what have I proven to you? Well, I've proven to you at best it's like exactly the same because we have the same amount of parents, which means the material about like the neurodivergent kids is just so much more important. But like if you believe what we told you, we've also proved to you that it's much worse and much worse exploitation on our side of the house. So proud on the side of the house that helps improve parents like raising their kids and stops worse exploitation of their children. So proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker, reverse the speaking order, and invite up the negatifier.
I'm good to go. Okay. Two things to go over in this reply. Firstly, who helps new parents, and then lastly, on exploitation of children and why it's significantly worse on their side of the house without parent influences. So firstly then on helping new parents that are struggling, what did Oliver tell you right from the beginning of his speech? He told you that you can get lots of different views from lots of different parents, like hundreds of thousands of parents, on their opinions, their experiences of how they raise their children and dealt with difficulties such as neurodivergency, but also I told you examples such as just like how did I got my kid to eat their vegetables. We think that this was uniquely harmful because they can like adapt these ideas into their own life, like to their own kids to see if they can work, because you have so many different ideas. You're not just restricted to what's like written in your one parenting textbook. You can use all of these ideas and experiment to see what works for your kids. We think that this is extremely helpful to actually like helping understand how to raise your kid, how to be a better parent, but also my additional like mechanism I told you about how like these parent influences just like can validate you for making you feel like a good parent because you're just trying your hardest, and they say, I like know you're struggling, but I did too, so you're doing a great job. We think that that is uniquely beneficial, the only benefit you can get from social media influencers that are parent influencers. But what were their main responses to this? Firstly, they told you that you like follow one like big norm on social media, such as like Nara Smith or Ballerina Farm, that's like big and sensationalized. We told you that like you have such a diverse content that you're not going to follow this. But we also told you that that is just like one example. You have so many subsets of like parent influences, such as like making dinner for my low-income family, how I like do Christmas shopping on a budget. We think that those are all uniquely beneficial because it actually helps you to do this. But also, what was their counterfactual here into actually helping parents and their like raising their kids? Their counterfactual, that was brought out at third, was just talking to it in a circle. Leo took that down as to why that was like inherently just not a good counterfactual, but also we think that this was just like brought out way too late in the debate to have any weight. Okay. I want you to weight this like point really highly, right? Because if you're a struggling parent, you're like struggling, you like have this brand new child in front of you that you just don't know how to raise, you can't afford a textbook, you can't afford to go to parenting classes, you want something that's easy and accessible to teach you how to raise your child. I think that that is extremely helpful and a good resource to help you raise this child. That is extremely important and only unique to our side of the house. So then, let's talk about exploitation of children, and note that this was their big push, and I think if I can mitigate this enough, we can win the debate. So they told us that like, your parents are going to sensationalize their child's life, they're going to exploit them, they're going to use their money to exploit their children. Okay, we told you right from the beginning that in Oliver's speech that we get worse exploitation on their side of the house. This was through things such as like their sports, beauty pageants, Hollywood, music industry, all of those kind of things that the parents pushes them into. What's really bad about this is that this exploitation is just inherently worse than children, right? Like if we do a comparison of like sending your kids to Disneyland and just filming them with like Winnie the Pooh and Mickey Mouse and riding Space Mountain compared to like literally like forcing your child to like start style themselves to look skinny for the beauty pageant, like pushing them through like tough training regimes. We think that like the comparison of that, like Disneyland versus like a horrible life, we think that like Disneyland just is inherently not as exploitative as like literally pushing your child. And I also told you why it was more likely that they were going to exploit their child in that way, and that parents, like these exploitative parents that want their children to be famous, they want to be famous through their children, just exist on either side of the house. Without social media, they take these more extreme avenues to actually get there. We think that is extremely harmful. And also, like, noting my split material on how social media actually gives like a way for people to actually see exploitation online, see these things such as getting child exploitation because people feel empathetic towards these children. Note that there was like very little response to that, and that we actually had that mechanism to catch these things. All in all, I think that because like child exploitation actually is like a minority of content, it's only just blown up and sensationalized in the media, the majority of like parent influencing content is actually all the helpful stuff that I outlined to you at the beginning of this reply. We help parents, and like that's the most important thing in this debate.
We thank the speaker and welcome up the F reply.
The negating team's entire case seems to rest on the fact that parenting influencers can somewhat help other parents who need to learn some tips. Well, first of all, we tell you that these are not the most important stakeholders in this debate. As we've pushed from first, the children of these influencers should be weighed the most highly in this debate. So I'm going to start with that as my first point, but then I will move on to the people who are learning from these influencers. To start with the exploitation of children, we pushed for you at first that children's whole lives being shown onto the internet has like huge negative impacts, especially with their parents as their bosses, especially because we showed you the incentives of these parents for engagement online. Therefore, they have like this incentive to push these kids to film their children. And then we also gave you reasons that even if the parents doing this for what they believe to be the best of their children, they still have to film the content. They still have to have like forms of this being pushed. The negating team just told us that actually to be a parent influencer, the child doesn't need to be like physically shown on screen. But as we said at second, this still like violates their privacy because you're still discussing this child, and like it still creates this tension between their parents because they know their story is being shared, usually without their consent. So we don't see how this is like any way beneficial on their side. Then the next big push was that there's a worse form of exploitation in being in beauty pageants and TV shows, etc. But as we said at second and at third, there's no reason why this doesn't also happen on their side. So then they told us that it happens more on our side because instead of turning to social media, people will turn to these things. First of all, we don't actually agree that these things are necessarily a worse form of child exploitation. We think all child exploitation is negative, and like in fact, like we don't see that being weighed out very, like, it's pretty even. But additionally, we don't see why there's no reason people can't be on social media and also pushing these people, like their children, into beauty pageants. Like, it just doesn't weigh out, which means on their side, they have not only these beauty pageants and TV shows, which as they showed us are explicitly harmful, but also social media. And as we've told you multiple times, it's much easier to push their kids onto social media than it is to push them into things like sports and things like TV, which means that this happens much more on their side of the house because you have a high rate of parents pushing them onto social media, especially, as they argued, not all parents have bad intentions. Therefore, these parents are more likely to push their kids onto social media than into beauty pageants because they know that, like, maybe it's not as bad as people think it is. Like, there's no, like, as I mentioned before, like, if they don't, like, they might think it's not as bad as it actually is. They've also ignored our point at first that influencers aren't necessarily opposed to getting negative comments because, as I mentioned, that increases engagement. So they rested a lot of their case on the fact that people won't post bad them abusing their kids or anything, or being something that's a bit sketch because people get negative comments. But we said, well, first of all, that's simply not true because, as I said at first, people enjoy this engagement. But additionally, they told us that it's fine because people will see this child getting exploited and stop it. And we're like, well, this is first of all not quite true, but also that child's still getting exploited in the first place, which is still a negative impact on their side of the house. So this should be the point that's weighed most highly on our side of the house, and we just believe that overall, even if only some children are being exploited on the internet, that's still a much worse harm than having some parents have to read a book instead of listen to a podcast about their neurodivergent child. So secondly, on the app, they had this huge push that parents have to learn parenting online because people don't read books anymore. Well, first of all, we see this is not necessarily true, but we can accept that maybe not all books are strictly about this specific child, but we don't see that all influencers are also strictly about this specific child because they gave us no reason why influencers also don't want to cater to a wide audience. So we gave you a couple of reasons, like alternatives for this. We told you like they could go to their friends or like people in their school or area who might have like similar issues, because they've just told us that like your friends won't necessarily have the same issues. We see this as like not necessarily being true because there's likely someone in your community does. But even if we agree, okay, that maybe no one has the exact same parenting style as you, first of all, no one online is necessarily going to either, so we don't see this as being like much worse on our side of the house than theirs. But also we just think this does not compare in any way to children being exploited more on the internet. We think that overall, on their side of the house, there's like way more exploitation of these kids online. Not only does this happen like with the parents with the worst intentions, with these kids being abused, with their whole lives being shown, but it also can happen just when these parents talk about their kids in a podcast online and their experiences get shown to the world. And this is way worse than a couple of parents not knowing exactly who to turn to about like their child not going up, getting out of bed in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you to both teams. I invite you to cross the floor, shake hands, and then everyone leave the room.